Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 8 topics, and the main topics for this chapter, of course, are wireless, mobile computing, and mobile commerce. And the opening case in our chapter talks about this firm called Republic Wireless, and there's another firm called Freedom Pop. Can anybody just like really quickly summarize how are these companies delivering wireless service? And when we say wireless, we mean phone service. How are they doing it? All right, how do regular phone companies give us service?
Through towers.
Yeah, through cell towers, right? Cellular service. It's a certain kind of radio technology that we use. And you pay a fee, whether it's a pay-as-you-go or a monthly fee, and then you get phone service and you get data, right? We got these new kind of companies popping up that are offering kind of an alternative approach. Yes, they do give you traditional cellular service, but they do something else to kind of augment it. What is it they're doing? Yeah, they're basically giving you data service by tapping into people's Wi-Fi. Let's think about that for a second, right? So you're making a phone call, right? And if for some reason there's Wi-Fi available that your device can tap into, it's part of some sort of a network, it'll take that phone call or your data, and instead of going over cellular, burning your data plan, it goes over Wi-Fi. Now the result of that is these services can give you cellular service with all this stuff you're used to for significantly lower cost. And you know what? We have a new company in the area that's pushing the same kind of service, but they're kind of masking it, right? Do you guys get like flyers from Spectrum? It's like save all this money on your wireless? Yeah, that's how they're doing it, folks. And I don't know if you noticed this, but even here in downtown Racine, and we'll talk about Kewpies, right? That's been on the mind, right? Like when I go over to Kewpies and I sit down and I have a burger, I can tap into like cable Wi-Fi or TWC cable or Spectrum internet. It's like all part of the same thing. And if you have a Spectrum account, you can log in, and anywhere you're at, you can tap into the Wi-Fi for free. And you don't have to worry about tapping into a store or using your data plan. And it's not really that big in this part of the country. Usually you have to be in a metropolitan area like downtown Racine where you're going to find that. In Milwaukee, I see them popping up all over the place. Where I first was introduced to that type of a service was in New York City. A couple years back, my wife and I went. She went for a conference, I went to hang out. And then everywhere I would go, I was like, holy cow, I'm on like Wi-Fi everywhere. Time Warner was just kicking in everywhere I went because the whole city is covered. I rarely had to use any of my data off of my phone. But that's how these companies are doing it. Isn't that kind of an interesting approach?
Yeah.
But what's the problem with that? Is there any problems with it that you see?
Well, you can tap into the Wi-Fi signal.
Okay. What about the people providing the Wi-Fi?
Oh, gotcha.
Right? There's some schemes out there, and I'm not sure exactly how Time Warner works this, but I always wonder, like if you're using, like, let's say, Spectrum or Time Warner's router at your house,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of people, they just like drop them in place, they plug in the cords, and they walk away. They don't change passwords, they don't lock it down. The thing's called My Spectrum Wi-Fi. I always wonder, do other Spectrum customers get to tap into that? Or for AT&T for that matter. And in some parts of the country, the answer to that is yes. I don't think that's true in Wisconsin because of our laws, but I think in other parts of the country, that's exactly how it works. So you're paying for Wi-Fi at home, and then somebody's driving down the street and they're tapping into your thing and getting their signal and cruising your data. How do you feel about that?
Betrayed.
Yeah, betrayed. But I want you to think about that because I think where the big carriers are moving to is to the point where that's exactly how they're going to cover everything. is they're gonna, like, you're gonna set up their service, and they might give you a discount if you use their gear, but people are tapping in to your gear. And I'm,
Genius, but at the same time, you kind of feel exploited.
yeah, it's kind of dastardly at the same time.
But if they include that with like WPA3, wouldn't that change things?
Yeah, if the security increases, I'm with you.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
Should be coming out, which miraculously they got kind
Yeah.
of quiet about.
All right, so when we got our new phones a couple years back, we're almost like 2 years into our plan. My wife wanted to go to Republic Wireless hardcore because she had a friend that did it, right, that was sick of the high cell phone bills. And then I had to like say, you know, honey, that's great, but when we're up north, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Period. You know, because we tried like every service up there. U.S. Cellular is the only one where you can like make a phone call. And not that we're up there that much, but it's enough, right? So I convinced her not to. But every time that bill comes due,
Yeah.
and I got like 4 people on the plan, yeah, it's a couple $100 plus. It's expensive, man. You know, so I think about that, and it's like, wow, we could have been paying half of this. But I still wouldn't switch. That's just me. All right. So in the last 10 years, let me ask you guys this really quickly. Somebody research. First smartphone. When was it released? When was the first smartphone released and what was it?
1979.
Yeah, 1979.
Was it the, BlackBerry?
I wouldn't call that a smartphone.
1992, and it's known as the Simon Personal Communicator.
Okay, that's a PDA.
Yeah.
I'd call that a PDA.
Yeah.
Personal digital assistant.
1996, the Nokia 9000 communicator.
Ah.
It was the first PDA/mobile phone device that they had.
So PDA,
There's it's not a smartphone.
personal digital assistant. I'm not calling it a smartphone quite yet. Here, you know what the difference really is the ability to move data and really where the device is like a fully functioning computer basically. So what was the first smartphone?
Okay, never mind. They just Ericsson R380 was the first device marketed as the smartphone in 1999.
Well, interesting. It's the first device marketed that way.
Yeah.
But what device really made it all take off? The iPhone.
Oh, that's right.
That was the revolution, right? When did that first come out? 2007. That's 12 years ago. Right? If you compare the way that mobile devices, these smartphones, these are fully functioning computers that just happen to be able to make phone calls to. Is really what it is, right? If you think about how quickly we've adopted these things compared to all the other technology that we've adopted. So when personal computers came out, you know when they came out? In the 70s, right? You want to see what the first personal computers look like? First personal, let's just look at like images. And you know what, I wouldn't call that the first personal computer, but, all right, this kind of, and this is early 80s, but actually, see this one right here? This one, the one I'm hovering over, bottom row, second from the left. That's called the Altair Basic. That used to cost $5,000 back in the mid-70s. Now, you got to keep this in perspective. In the mid-70s, for $5,000, I could buy 2 brand new cars. And I'm not talking Chevy Novas, I'm talking like an Oldsmobile. You know what like a 98 or something. You know, you could buy 2 nice cars back then for that price. And do you guys notice there's no monitor, no keyboard, no mouse. It's all like little switches and stuff. And yes, you could program it, kind of. It was kind of like ENIAC in a box, right? And then after that, we had Apple Computer, right? They came out and they built a computer in the garage. Like, you guys ever see what that one looks like? That's kind of like first Apple. And check it out. This is it right here. First Apple computer. They built the case out of wood. In a garage. right? They bought the parts from like Heathkit and Radio Shack to put it together. That's how they built the thing, right? But that's considered kind of like the first personal computer, and of course it kind of ramped up pretty quickly. But how long from let's say the mid-70s until we really, as a culture, fully adopted the personal computers? Now, most of you guys can't answer that because you didn't live through it, right? But I'm going to tell you, it went well into like the mid to late 90s, if not into the early 2000s, before everybody, like you could walk into any house and somebody had either a laptop or a desktop or something, right? So it like took 20, 25 years to really get full adoption. These smartphones, double the pace. Double the pace. How many of you in here do not have a smartphone on you right now?
Period.
Just, okay, period, all right. You are an anomaly, sir.
Yep.
And I'm guessing it's probably more because of your
I don't
I
parents.
can't, no, what happens is I can't put the thing down for 2 seconds. and it just turns-
Okay, so you got like a reason not to hold one, okay. Eric?
I have it on the table.
Okay, well. But you have a laptop, a tablet, and a smartphone. That's, talk about a rate of adoption, right? What's really made this possible is all the wireless networking technology. There was a time that the only way you could get on the internet was to plug a cord into your machine, whether it was a phone line or a network cable. That was the only way you're getting internet and the only way you're connecting to the outside world. The moment we had Wi-Fi, complete game changer. I told you about like how when I redid my house,
Yeah.
I thought I was really clever, putting in all this wiring everywhere. Like, I got Cat 5 and fiber everywhere. I'm all set for the future. 2 years later, Wi-Fi comes out, and it's like, damn. You know, and not that I don't use the wiring, I do use it a little bit, but it was like totally a miscalculation on my part.
It's kind of nice too, because like, I live in a pretty old house, so I don't have like internet routed through. I mean, I still want to put internet in, but I don't have the time right now. But, you know, it's kind of nice just to be able to have my computer, you know, connected. Before all that, I mean, if you didn't have, you know, the ability to route cabling through, I mean,
Yeah, you're pretty much not online.
yeah, exactly.
But, you know, not only were we like doing this like Wi-Fi thing, see like the new paradigm now for Wi-Fi, that box up on the ceiling there, the rectangular one,
Yep.
that's our Wi-Fi, right? The old approach to doing Wi-Fi in a building like this is they would have took that access point, they would have put it out in the hallway, and probably had like maybe 2 of them for the whole floor. That's plenty. Now they have one in every classroom, because here we all walk in, all these desktops that you guys are sitting at are all wireless. All your phones are connected, all your tablets are, we probably have like 50 devices in this room that are connected to that access point. That's crazy. That's one room in a campus that's got multiple buildings, multiple floors, multiple classrooms. Right. But then it extends beyond these access points to the cell towers that we have outside of here. So when we walk off campus, when we disconnect from the Wi-Fi, all of a sudden, all of our devices are tapped into the data that we get from our cellular carriers, right? And depending on the kind of plan you have different amounts of data. So my wife and I, we get 6 gigs a month each, right? The kids only get 2. And then they hit that 2, which they always do, and then it like throttles down. And they get really frustrated, especially now that they lock them out at school. Because it used to be they'd be at school all day, you know, YouTubing, you know, Snapchatting or whatever they're doing. But now the school's locking them down. Well, let's just hope that like Gateway never does that. But college campuses typically won't. But that cellular service, now that's kind of a miraculous thing in itself. If you really stop and think about what it's done, where I can be in the middle of almost anywhere, like those ads that you see, and still tap into the internet. And what am I doing with that technology? Figuring out what the nearest McDonald's is, or, you know, think about what you do with the technology. Is it really useful? Half the time it's social media, right? How many of you can honestly say that Most of the reason you use a computer or a smartphone is for social media.
I can say I can only use it, I only use it for music, that's pretty much it.
You know, I mean, that's kind of the reality. And those of you that aren't fessing up are lying, right? I try to stay away from social media, but I still spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the only time I use social media is to pull off memes, but that's it.
I don't know.
I don't, I just use my computer for music, for the rest of
I
Wi-Fi.
mean, would you consider YouTube like social media in a way?
It is. It has, you know, there's like threaded conversations and stuff, and you like stuff, and you can share stuff, and you can subscribe or follow something, right? I was always amazed. I would take my class videos and I started posting them on YouTube. And the reason I did it is because the closed captioning is automatic, right? It works pretty well. That's why I did it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, somebody subscribed. Now I'm like up to almost 400 subscribers. I'm not really sure what they're subscribing to, but hey, they're doing it, so. I think if I get up to 10,000, maybe I can make some money off of it, except Gateway would take it from me. All right. Now, let's talk about these things, right? Most of the ones that we carry these days will have a quad-core processor in them, or at least a dual-core, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys know how much RAM and storage you have on your devices?
I know what the.
Right. The geeks jump right. Oh, I know, right? And my son will sit there and spout off all like, well, actually, Dad, your display is not in the highest resolution mode. You need to switch to, you know, like, you're not really getting 4K video when you're shooting it, you know, Dad. Because he has the same phone as me, you know. That was a mistake. Never get the kids as good a phone as what you have. Just a tip for future parents.
I have the most advanced phone in my family. Everyone else has iPhone 6, I have 8 Plus.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't buy old technology, folks. That's another tip.
I had an old
It's not worth
phone,
it.
and it's weird.
What
I
happened to
had
the
multiple
medical
phones, they all
technology?
go to continuousness factor resetting. I have an iPad and a phone that both say that, so I can't go on those anymore. And I had pretty irreplaceable stuff on there. I had pictures of my dead cat on that I can never get back. So
Yeah, well, you know, if you're using a wireless device, the one thing you should do is figure out an automatic backup mechanism. So like, whenever I take a photograph on this thing, it's in my Google Drive like instantly.
I was
When I'm on Wi-Fi.
iCloud.
You know, and that's a smart move. But these devices, for as cool as they are on a personal level, and most of the time we're texting. So we've had this like texting revolution, which bugs the heck out of me as an old timer. Right? You guys are like, okay, old guy, right? But really, the communications, and I get kind of like a little bit of an attitude with it, I guess, you know. But I hate texting. It's like, if you're like, hi honey, hi, you know, can you stop and get some pizza? Sure. You know, okay, good use, right? Or I'm running a little late, you know, ETA 15 minutes. But then I'll get somebody like my sister, sorry, sister, who's like, text message 1 of 7. You know, each one's like this long on my screen. Right? And then you know, she's got an iPhone and I got an Android, so sometimes they're out of order. So I'm like, okay, this is 1 of 7, no, this is 3 of 7. Okay, like, where's 2, right? But anyways, I get the message and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not reading this. Can you just call me? Do you know why? And I have the same issue with email. Because if you're like sending me a message and it's more than a couple sentences long, it's like, come on.
There's a lot.
I can say all that to you in like 15 seconds and we'll understand each other better and I'm going to know if you're lying to me or not because I can hear it in your voice rather than the text message. And I'm not saying that texts don't have their place because sometimes, you know what, I kind of don't want to talk to people, right? It's like, I don't really want to call them, I just send them a text.
You know what's worse?
What's that?
Group messages and you're not even in the conversation.
Yeah, I hate those too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, why are you messaging me? I'm not
And then your
even-
phone's going off like every 3 seconds. Yeah, I hate that too.
It's worse when there's like 20 people in a conversation, and you're off like at school or in the movies, and you gotta turn your phone off so that it doesn't go off.
It's bad enough when the screen just lights up, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's not buzzing and
It
beeping.
bothers me.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, I'm watching this great movie and your screen's on. Damn it, you know? But how many of you like use the other technologies on here? How many of you use like Google Hangouts or FaceTime or like video call? Does anybody do that?
A couple times.
Like, young people are into it. I'm trying to get my wife to do this. And she's like, no. She'll text me,
I've done with my mom, but she's in the fifties.
right? What else have phones done for our society?
Headphones?
Headphones?
Oh,
Well, one thing that they've done is they've eliminated long-distance calling,
Yeah, that's right.
except for maybe international calling.
Yeah. Still got
But what do people do for international calls?
They press the one key.
Hangouts, FaceTime,
Yeah.
they just use like, Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So why make a phone call when you can contact somebody for free?
Skype.
Yeah, well, and those are all basically the same technologies. You can see and hear each other, right? If you choose, you can share screens, you can type chat messages. Even here at Gateway, we got this big culture of like Google Hangouts for video calls and for text chatting.
Oh, yeah, guilty as charged last year.
Yeah. And very interesting, but the size and the portability has created a lot of challenges for business and industry. Another thing that's really, I should go to this slide here, you want to look at some of the stuff you can do with the phone. What else has happened, I think, with these? Everybody has a way to record audio and video whenever they want. Something's going down, I'm videoing. You know, you see like somebody like, they're having a heart attack, everybody just stands around and takes a video. How about somebody like help the person? Do you ever think that when you're watching those videos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden, no matter what you do, people are recording it. For better or for worse. Right? So it's not bad enough that I have a captionist capturing my every word. I'm also recording myself right now, so anybody that didn't show up or you guys want to go back and listen to this for some reason, God knows why. But I'll also get people, and I don't see anybody in this room doing it, but every once in a while I'll get a student that'll set up their phone, you know, like leaning up against the computer, and I'm like, what are you doing? I'm recording. Like, oh wow.
I can take video, I can take audio on my phone.
So really, people have the capability to record just about anything, so you have to be careful.
Yeah, you do. You have to be careful what you say out in public, folks. You have to be careful what you say behind closed doors these days. You know why? Because that stuff gets out on the internet. Thank you, social media. And you guys that are going to be looking for work in a year or 2 or 3 or whatever, how do you think that people don't research you?
I knew someone that didn't get jobs because they researched them.
Do you know that there's some companies that you work for, and we'll talk about this in the social media chapter, that will say, all right, as part of the terms of employment, we're going to pay you $200K, but we get access to your Facebook account. How do you feel about that?
That's fine, I don't use it.
$200K a year?
I don't care.
They can have a Facebook account.
They're not going on my.
Yeah, because all of a sudden you're making like a different account, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can direct them to one of my extra accounts. I have extra accounts just so I have my.
I'm going to tell your parents.
To talk to people that have blocked my other account.
Now that brings up a whole separate issue, but
I was gonna say, there's actually some companies that won't even hire you if you don't have Facebook or some kind of social media.
right. Some people want you to have social media.
Well, yeah, they can track it.
So they-
But, you know, I had this interesting situation happen with an old high school friend of mine, right? It was like when I was in high school, he was like, not my locker mate, but he was like the next locker over. Actually, this way, right? Junior high school and high school, you know. Anyhow, of course we were friends too. When he finally got on Facebook, people started posting stuff to his Facebook page from the old days when we used to hang out and party like crazy. Right? And there was one time where he fell asleep at a party. You know what happens to people who fall asleep at a party, right? They draw on them. They make them wear silly clothes. And then I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, do these people realize this guy's like a professional? You know, he's like a white collar professional kind of guy. And the stuff that's on that page could get him fired.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you guys ever think about that? Or how about this? You call into work sick. I'm sick. I can't come to work today. Then all of a sudden you're on Facebook. It's not you posting it, it's your buddy posting it. You were at the party, you know, you're doing a beer bong or whatever you know, whatever your deal is. They still do that stuff?
Yeah.
All right. Or whatever, right? Whatever you're doing, and it's like, wait, I thought you were sick. Looks like you were out having a great time.
I was sick while I was doing that.
Yeah, it was so sick.
Or what a better way to break into somebody's house than you posting online, hey, I'm in Florida. Great.
I walked to my neighbor's house and did that.
You guys think about those things. A lot of it is enabled by these devices. How many times have you been on Facebook and somebody you know is like, you know, they're visiting somewhere or they're at a show and it's Facebook Live,
Yeah.
right? Wow. That's even scarier. There's no filter. Watch what you say, folks. Cameras are everywhere. And it's not just the ones we're holding in our hands. It's all the ones.
So be paranoid all the time.
Well, I don't know where they put them in these rooms, but all the rooms have cameras and mics. You guys should know that on campus here. Anywhere where there's technology, because they want to protect it.
In theory. That's a
All right.
theory of security.
It might be a theory. But look at all these capabilities that these wireless devices have brought us. And think about what stuff you use most often. And what is the most transformative to society?
UPS.
I'm not sure what I would pick off of that list, but you know, the ability to have the internet in my hand no matter where I go, that's pretty huge for me. Because I think of it as like the internet as a place where I can do all sorts of different things. That's what I think. So having either Wi-Fi or cellular data is what makes the device magical for me. A phone call, that's probably the least thing I use my phone for. Yeah. How many people use this as a personal entertainment device? Right?
Yep. Watch Netflix and stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought, when I saw my kids doing it, I'm like, that's stupid. Oh, look, that's kind of cool. I'm like, well, and I can download it now to my phone, so I don't even have to be on data to watch the movie? Yeah, and I do it all the time. It's transformative technology, you guys. Transformative. All right, we talked about a lot of different types of transmission media, right? We talked about satellites. All right, so I'm kind of fast forwarding here. Okay, so how many of you, right, you got a car that's got like a fancy display like that?
No.
See, I have this pattern of driving really old vehicles, you know?
I don't have a car.
I said old, not illegal. Like, okay, so my newest vehicle is a 2006. But I have just a philosophy that I'm not making a car payment. That's just me. You know, I'd rather drive an old car as clean title, no payments to anybody, drive it into the ground, get another one. That's my philosophy. But there's lots of people, like my in-laws, who always buy a brand new car. So like their latest one is like a 2018 Subaru, and you walk into that thing, and it's like you don't even have to hit a button to get into the car. It just, as you walk up, it just unlocks because it knows it's you, right? You get in the car, and you can either voice command it to start, or touch the button to start. You don't even have to put the key in the ignition. And then they got like this really fancy like navigation computer system, and of course they don't pay into all the services. But how many of you have like stepped into a car like that, right? And seen the technology is like backup cameras, lane sensors, so if you're like drifting, cruise control that like adjusts its speed automatically. Yeah, you used to sell them, that's right, you were in car sales. Hey, I got a car for you. But we're moving into the autonomous vehicle age. And we're not thinking about mobile computing in terms of automobiles, but computers are becoming an integral part of automobiles, and not just from the standpoint of running your fuel injection systems. Because when they first put computers in cars, it was they needed it to control the fuel injection, because they needed a computer to control the firing, right? To make the motor work correctly. And now it's just a natural extension. You can tie in, you can make your phone calls through that screen, you can get your navigation going, you can get satellite internet or Wi-Fi. There's cars that have like hotspots built into them. Yeah, it is really bad. But it's there, not a service I would buy into. But this is the era that we're stepping into, and when we think about all the wireless technology and what it's enabling it in our vehicles now too. And at what point are we letting go of the wheel and letting the computer drive the car? Everybody says that. Until they can realize they can binge watch another show because they don't have to drive. Then you're all over it. Yeah, I kind of feel like you, Selwyn. You know, I want the control. A vehicle for me is freedom. In fact, give me a manual transmission if possible. That's just me. But it's not the way of the future. Your children and your children's children will probably not drive. They will probably not drive. You guys might still, maybe a generation that follows you, but that's all going away. And all the vehicles will be electric. People probably won't own their vehicles. Yeah, you'll buy into like a rideshare program. The car shows up in the morning to take you to work, picks you up afterwards. You don't have to maintain it, you just pay your fee. It's kind of appealing actually, right? It's a little bit appealing. It's kind of like living in a condo. You don't have to shovel snow or mow the grass, right? You got more time to binge watch stuff. It's all about binge watching, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, we're talking about like all sorts of networks, and you know we've talked about a lot, but you know like everybody's got the router in their house now, right? Is there anybody that does not have internet at home? You don't even have to admit it. You can't even get dial-up anymore, like ask for it. Yeah. Do you know there's still parts of the country though where that's the only way you can get online? Aside from satellite.
Yeah.
You know what's happening though is we have companies like Google. Okay, so we have all the cellular technologies, and of course we are moving into 5G. And I think I already told you guys that right here on the Racine Lakefront, in fact, if you guys drive up and down Pershing Boulevard, whatever it's called, look for it. I don't know if they still have the Ditch Witch parked down there, but they have two giant spools, one's black and one's orange, for the new fiber they're running down here where they're going to put in the 5G. One of the first spots in the state, right? The technology ramped up pretty quickly, but it's not the only approach to do data wirelessly. We just think cellular because that cellular is prevalent. How about this wireless broadband, or WiMAX, which is basically Wi-Fi, but much stronger on big towers? There are parts of the country where they get their internet like that. There's Google is really big on it, if you guys aren't aware of it. There's also spots in a lot of rural areas in particular where they're bringing in high-speed fiber and gigabit and Ethernet to the home. You know what that means? Gigabit? That's like Time Warner times 10 and then some for most people. Right to your home, folks. We're talking like internet speeds faster than what we have here on campus coming to your home. You know places that have that kind of service? Far northern Wisconsin. You go up to like Cable, Wisconsin. It's one of the first places in the country to get gigabit Ethernet. Okay, it does cost a fortune. It's not cheap, right? But if you're running a business up there, let's see, if I was like, hey, I was an internet startup company, I bet you I could buy property and a building really cheap up in Cable, Wisconsin, and I got gigabit Ethernet, I can operate there just as equal as like being in New York City. So really what it does is having that bandwidth and that capability is kind of opening up markets for all sorts of different things, and that's kind of an exciting thing. And pretty soon, that landscape's gonna change. How they're gonna provide that internet, wired still seems to be prevalent. So whether it's gonna be fiber optic or copper wires right to your building, and then it converts to wireless. That's probably the paradigm we'll have for a while. But I think we are gonna move to some really clever schemes in the near future where wireless will just be ubiquitous, whether it's cellular or WiMAX. You guys hear about like some of the other technologies that like Google's putting out there? Have heard about like where they're thinking about like floating balloons up?
Yeah.
And they have like a whole network of balloons and you just sit up there? All right, well that one went down. We'll just shoot up another one.
Portable weather balloons gone internet.
Yeah, that's one of the techniques. And they're coming up with all sorts of clever little ways that they're gonna try to get wireless to everybody.
What's doing all this work, 'cause they go down really quick just when it gets cool sometimes.
They do. Now, interestingly, you know where they test out a lot of this technology? In the battlefield, right? The military. You know, so the way that they connect up the devices. They've also thought about like maybe we could create these, if not weather balloons, we could just have some drones up there that are maybe solar powered.
Yeah.
And they kind of sit in one spot, right? And then they just broadcast down the internet.
Well, I'm still.
And yes, they might go down once in a while, but we'll have so many of them up there, it doesn't matter.
That's gonna create problems with the FAA.
Yeah, it will. There's like this like weird balancing act. But I think that the general thought is wired is still better, but we're moving towards a more and more wireless world, really necessitated by the fact that we have these. And the really big change in enterprise, folks, is a lot of big companies, and Northwestern Mutual, and that one lady from the advisory board works at Northwestern Mutual. And I know from a fact, because I had one of my students that also works there, worked there all the way through his degree. So he already had the job, but he was just coming for the piece of paper. He helped hook up their whole new building. And their operating paradigm changed from wired desktops plugged in with an Ethernet cable that would chase out to a closet like we have across the hall where it's a bunch of flashing lights and cables plugged into like routers and switches and whatnot, to most of all the devices that were desktops, the few that were left, were all wireless, and they're switching to a BYOD, bring your own device paradigm. So you know what? If you're getting a job, you gotta have a laptop. Mac, PC, Linux, Raspberry Pi, phone, tablet, they don't care. So what's happening in the enterprise now is all of a sudden they're not necessarily providing you with a computer, unless you have some specific high-level task to do. And now they have to manage a different type of approach. So instead of worrying about pushing out updates to your device, now they just have to give you a connection. And it creates a whole different host of problems, though. Security for data, encryption, you know, how are you getting on the network? You know, what wireless technology are we using? Like if you come here to Gateway, usually, you know, a lot of students just tap into the guest Wi-Fi. You guys can tap into the infrastructure Wi-Fi too with your username and password. You know, you get a little different level of service if you do that. You get more bandwidth for one thing, but you can also connect all of our internal systems if you're connected that way. And a lot of companies are operating the same way. That is the operating paradigm. So they went from having on every floor at Northwestern Mutual these huge data closets. They still have them, but it's like less than 1/10 of the infrastructure wired than it used to be. Why? Because of wireless. All right. Let's move on to some other topics here. I don't think we're going to be able to get to the cloud computing stuff this week. So we'll talk about that more next week, but that should be on your radar. We talked about mobile commerce. How many of you guys buy stuff on your phones? What do you buy?
Everything.
Music, everything.
Games.
All right, groceries?
Sure.
You've done that?
On Amazon.
Okay. Jimmy John's? Pizza Hut?
Domino's.
Like, actually, there's like buttons you can push and get like, not like, my sister used to live in the river house, and by braiding, she push buttons, and they deliver like Tide, like, or like toilet paper from Amazon, it's like a button.
Yeah.
Because they have like a marketplace downstairs.
You know, the one that kills me is there's some like Facebook or YouTube video of like a parrot ordering
Oh, yeah.
ordering stuff on Amazon and then cursing at the same time.
Bought my laptop online.
I bought Amazon off of Amazon.
You bought an Amazon off of Amazon?
Yeah, stuff that Amazon sells off of Amazon.
All right. The Internet of Things, folks. So here's some more like kind of like keywords you should kind of focus in on. So we talk about the Internet of Things as kind of this category. There's a couple of other categories that go with that. A real big growth area for technology is one called the Industrial Internet of Things. So if you're like in an engineering track, they call that IIoT. That's a real big one. All right. Where are we seeing like growth in these things? So notice IoT, right? Smart home, we've talked about that. See that a lot in healthcare. So like think about like if you go to a hospital and they got you hooked up to a monitor, they're checking your blood pressure, your heart rate and all that stuff. In most of those machines, at least in the old days, they would all like they'd all be like hardwired. It was like weird custom wiring. And now it's all Wi-Fi. Right? You don't even have to worry about hardwiring it anymore. Right? Do you want the nurse to know when your heart stopped? Maybe. That's huge. But how about like in some of these other industries? So like supply chain management, remember I was telling you about Walmart and their pallets coming into the building? Combination of RFID chips and then like smart sensors in their warehouse. The pallet just comes off the truck, comes in the building, it's in inventory. Boom, just like that. Nobody has to data enter it. It's just automatic. So that's been happening there for a long time. But the fact that in industry, if you work in like a big technologically advanced factory, the huge movement is live monitoring of manufacturing as it's happening on the fly to be able to read data off of like, let's say an industrial robot that's making an engine, and then you might see some data coming off of that robot that says, you know, the robotic arm is overheating and after like 5,000 cycles it's going to fail, right? And that data is being sent in live so that you can actually say, well, you know what? Let's take that one down, slide a different one into its place so we can fix that one before it completely fails and becomes really expensive to fix.
Pretty impressed for a long time, but I used to try like computers or like go back and inside and change things. Like I just like physically swap out mags and cylinders and stuff, but like I'd have to tell the computer like I'm measure like this much, turn this much, where it's gonna hit and all kinds of stuff.
Who did you work for?
I was a small business called a lot of my group out of Sussex, but
Okay.
I worked at Quad and got trained essentially.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of got that feeling. And I know a bunch of quad people, that's why I asked. So, and they're really big on that because if, you know, in the printing business, you think that's like a business that's going out of business, right?
Yeah.
Because everything's electronic now. Well, people still buy magazines.
Labels,
Yeah.
definitely too. Everything that's sorts of labels.
Yep. And then you guys are you know, I mean, and it's not just printed material. So like, you guys may have printed this even,
Yeah, we
you
made
know?
like beer labels, like for like smaller like microbreweries, we needed just like even with a can, like stuff like this.
Right. But that's a process, and they're heavily computerized because if they're not, they become inefficient, and if they're inefficient, they go out of business. And that's what it's all about now. But it's a huge amount of data being generated in the process. All right, so we talked about a little bit about security, right? We talked about what war driving is. What exactly are some of these other things? So if I say rogue access points, what's that, Eric? Kind of figured you'd jump in on that.
It's basically a spoofed access point. So like if I set up my laptop, I can have you guys connect to it thinking it was the gateway access point. Basically, I use it to gather your data and do whatever I got to do with it. So
Like you walk into Starbucks is a good example, or, you know, pick a coffee shop. And you sit down, it's like, oh, free Wi-Fi. And then you bring up your little list of wireless, and you're not gonna connect to one that says like Sam's iPhone, right? You won't connect to that one. But if it's like if you brought up your wireless right now, you know, and I can use my phone as a hotspot, and all I have to do is change the name to say GTC Guest, or
Oh, yeah.
GTC Wireless, and all of a sudden you're connecting to it with your username and password. Guess what? Oh, I got your username and password.
That's genius.
It is. You would be surprised how common a hack that is. People sit in coffee shops, put out fake access points, usually on their phones or their laptops or both, just to gather that information, because now they have your username and password to log in to something.
Coincidentally enough, actually, I think back to that point in my life, where I was walking through a Starbucks and I saw a guy switching back and forth. I'm like, what is he doing? He had like a bunch of scripts running. I'm like, now it dawns on me. I'm like, oh, like 5, 6, 7 years later, I'm like, oh wait, I think I understand what he was doing.
Yeah, and you know what's funny about that, Eric, is a lot of places that got manipulated that way, and coffee shops are real prevalent, they actually have people that go in and monitor it now.
Yeah.
So like Starbucks has people on staff that go around and make sure that people aren't spoofing access points. And they, you know, it's not hard to do. It's like there's 10 people in here with a laptop. It's like, well, you're on Facebook and you're, oh, okay, you're the one.
But it could be a guy in a parking lot or.
Yeah, it could be.
Random guy.
Famous hacks, like Home Depot, maybe 10 years ago or so, they had somebody sitting out in their parking lot that could tap into all their credit card transactions because their Wi-Fi wasn't locked down. And all the credit card transactions were being transmitted in clear text. All the numbers, all the expiration dates, all security codes, all that stuff captured. Interestingly, last week my wife bought gas at a gas station right near her house, right? And she ran her card, and it's like, decline. And she's like, what? You know, you just got paid, right? Do it again. Decline. Do it again. It didn't work. So she goes into the place. Then she goes and checks, you know, online to check like what's going on. And it turned out there was a skimmer. They tried to grab $100 for each time she swiped. So it said declined. I don't know how they worked it. Yeah. No, we didn't lose any money in the process, but that was $300. That's not nothing, you know. Yeah, so you guys watch it when you're transacting with your card anywhere. What about radio frequency jamming? What the heck does that mean?
Where you jam the radio frequency of a device with a jammer.
Okay. Or by just
Very illegal.
yeah, it is very illegal. In fact, that's kind of like a military technique when they go in and they try to like attack somebody. Often they'll have devices that broadcast out signals to block all the other ones. But you know, if you live in a place like where I live, right? I live in a very high density neighborhood. You know, it's like every house, it's like, you know, my house probably has, well, it's a bigger footprint than this, but our lot is probably not much wider than this room, right? And there's probably, just conservatively, 100 households on my street. And right behind, across from the alley from us, is like a giant apartment building with probably a couple hundred residents. Everybody's got Wi-Fi. The house next door to us is full of students, right? There's 4 flats, 2 houses on the same lot, 4 flats. Some of the flats, they have multiple Wi-Fi. You know what a pain it is for me? You know what I've had to do at home? I used to have 1 access point for the whole house, no problem. Could get anywhere in the house, outside, I could get in, be online. All these people started moving into the neighborhood. Now I have 3 access points in the house so that I can make sure I can get Wi-Fi in the house. And sometimes I still can't. It's frustrating. Depending on like where I'm at. And I don't have like low-end equipment. I got like the, you know, the Netgear Nighthawk with like 6 antennas like cranking full throttle, and I still have issues. So that's another thing that happens is just there's so many people have Wi-Fi now, all broadcasting on the same frequencies. So you can like actually go into your settings for your router and change the channel or get that 5G going, where a lot of people don't use 5G, and you can change the channels. And if you have the right software, there's lots of free software out there you can research, you can look at what everybody else is broadcasting, because most people broadcast on channel 1.
Or 6, actually.
6, 11, and what you can do is you can get somewhere in between and get a little bit better signal. Or you can use strategies like take your router out of the basement and put it up high somewhere, so there's less, you know, like physical interference with your router. But that's a really big problem. So some of that radio jamming isn't necessarily intentional, it just happens because there's just so much Wi-Fi everywhere. You guys might have that issue. So that's one of the reasons I think that we're gonna start seeing companies like AT&T and Time Warner, when you buy into their service, they're gonna get like a coordinated system, and it'll probably take a while before it happens, but I see that that might be kind of the way it is. The benefit, of course, of that is that you can go anywhere where that kind of Wi-Fi exists and tap in and not have to pay. And just keep in mind, that's how Spectrum does their phone service. That's why they can do it so cheap. They're doing the Republic, or whatever that one other one was called. All right. Yeah, that's going to be your case problem, so you guys can read up on that. But we're all done, folks. We're 1 minute over it, actually. I know you guys don't want it to end, I'm sure. Actually, you want to get the hell out of here as fast as possible, I'm sure. All right, so next week, we're going to be moving into the next chapter on posting assignments later today, and the technology guide on cloud computing, which I think is a pretty important one. So, see you all next week.